and welcome to Book It. I'm Carol Anne Riddell. We have a great show ahead for you today, starting with poet and author Sally Wen Mao, who is also a member of our CUNY family. Her latest book is a collection of short stories called Ninetails. Sally, thanks so much for coming by today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Great. So to me, the stories in the book read a little bit like dark fairy tales for adults. I really enjoyed them. There is this thread that runs through the book, and it is this mythological creature, the fox spirit. So let's start there. Can you just sort of briefly explain to us the fox spirit and what the significance is?
Yes, so the fox spirit, it's a mythological creature that dates back thousands of years. And I initially wrote one story based on what I knew at the time about the fox spirit, the nine-tailed fox spirit. She's a shapeshifter. She can cross borders. She's sort of a trickster, right?
Yes. She can be good or bad, right?
Yeah, she can be a demon or a goddess.
Right.
So
I guess we all can.
Yes,
at some level.
Yeah, and then as I was doing more research on the fox spirit, I realized, you know, I had a lot more to say about it. That it seems like a transgressive creature to me. I really wanted to investigate its history, its cultural significance, and hence Ninetails.
And it's present in various cultures, right?
Yeah, so I'm referring to the Chinese version, the Hulijing, but there's also a version in Japan, in Korea, in Vietnam even. So it really pervades like East Asian cultures.
So interesting. And now your title is clever because it is nine tails, like the tail of a fox, but also nine tales, T-A-L-E-S, 9 stories. Is the number 9 significant for you?
Yes, so I wrote that story initially when I was on a 9-month fellowship at the New York Public Library, and then I thought to myself, 9 tales, 9 months. I'm going to try to write a story per month. It was really just a fun, a fun experiment I had at the time.
One of the reviews I read of the book talked about how you use these stories to explore the objectification of Asian women. Did you start out with that as a goal, or did that sort of evolve over time?
I was already writing about that theme in my poetry, and in Oculus. That was my second collection of poetry, which I view these projects as in tandem with each other because I started this project right after Oculus. And so I was still thinking about a lot of those themes in Oculus, which is the particular experience of Asian women in America and in Western contexts, and the ways in which stereotypes are constantly being projected onto them.
Sure. So one of the other things that runs through these stories, it's kind of an organizing idea of the book, is Angel Island, which was a detention and processing center for thousands of immigrants in California. Sometimes it's called the Ellis Island of the West.
Yes.
So just briefly, tell us, how does that history figure in here?
Well, Angel Island is a part of my own history. When
you went on a field trip, right?
Yeah,
as a kid, I read that. Yes.
Yeah, so when I was in middle school, I went on a field trip to see Angel Island, and I just remembered, there were poems on the walls, carved into the walls by the detainees who were there. And I remembered even when I was 12, feeling very disturbed and also moved by the poetry, and it's always made this very deep impression on me. And I was thinking about these immigrants who were being detained and being quarantined at the time, because their bodies were also believed to be vectors of disease, right? In addition to being subjected to the Chinese immigration bans.
Yes.
So I really wanted to write about that, and I ended up doing research on Angel Island, and I was thinking about how fox spirits tend to be attracted to these liminal spaces. They're very attracted to like abandoned temples, for example, or places that were once inhabited and a little haunted. So I thought Angel Island is that place. So I sort of imagined what it would be like if there was this sort of supernatural fox presence on Angel Island.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You know, I know you were born in China and you moved to the States, I think, when you were about 5. Is that right? And you've said that to some degree your work reflects having felt alone or feeling different in some way. Can you explain some of that?
I mean, yes. So I think the whole collection, I'm imagining characters that have either been marginalized or have felt alienated to some degree in their lives, and I think it figures into my feelings growing up as like an only child, as someone who was constantly moving from place to place. And I also think of the fox spirit as this icon of otherness, right? Of being different. I found myself being drawn to the fox because its outsider status also gives it its like unique power. And I wanted to imagine what that would look like.
I think all of us at times in our lives have felt like outsiders, right?
Yes, yes.
All of us have. I know that I mentioned before that you're part of our CUNY family. You teach in the English department at Baruch. So does working with students change your writing or, I don't know, inform your writing in some way?
Always, yeah. I've always found that teaching, it's a symbiotic thing with my writing, mostly because I try to choose books that I'm also interested in. And for the past 2 semesters, I've taught great works of literature. And I decided I would approach it via speculative fiction. So any fiction that invokes mythology, fairy tales, the surreal, the speculative. And I found that, the insights that my students give in their essays and their conversations, it has really informed me as a writer. It has pushed me to think of the speculative in new and really exciting ways.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that struck me about the stories is that you combine these elements that on the one hand feel completely like supernatural or mystical, and on the other are very grounded in sort of modern reality.
Right.
Just as an example, in one story you've got a fox spirit and a ghost, like combing through Zillow and StreetEasy looking for an empty apartment in New York City, which I found very amusing and also very relatable because if you live in New York, you know what a challenge that is. So, what was behind that approach, kind of blending those two aspects?
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of fun with that.
Yeah,
right?
it seemed like fun.
That was my initial what if question going into writing the collection. It's like, well, these fox spirits have always existed in, Qing Dynasty, Ming Dynasty China. What would happen if they were actually thrust in this modern city environment, right? And like the story you mentioned, Lotus Stench, it's actually a direct retelling of a Pu Songling story called Lotus Scent, where in that story there was a male scholar and a ghost and a fox spirit, and they were a throuple.
Yeah.
And in my story, I decided that, they should dump him and become friends. What would that look like,
yes,
right?
So it's great. Yes, that's funny how that happens. And so the two of them end up together. The two that were both dating the same person.
Yes, exactly. So really, it's like my reimagination is just like, how can we rewrite these stories that have always been somewhat patriarchal, right? Like really patriarchal, like come from a very patriarchal viewpoint.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
And I think that infusing the stories with those sort of modern problems, I think that's part of the fun I had, because it's combining things that I'm familiar with, experiences that I've had, even swiping on dating apps, things like that, and making them the problem of this ghost and this fox spirit, right?
You are widely known as a poet, very acclaimed as a poet. This was your first work of fiction. Did you find it more challenging or challenging in a different way? I mean, certainly the word count is different, I imagine.
Yes, the word count is vastly different from poetry. I do think that it was challenging for me to switch to this genre. When I was studying as an undergrad, I was a creative writing major, so but during that time you didn't have to choose genres. So I was
But you had some grounding in it at least.
I was taking the fiction classes, I was taking the poetry classes, and then it wasn't until grad school that I was forced to choose a genre. But what happened is that when I went back to the fiction writing genre, it felt really invigorating for me, just because I felt like I was a novice again. I felt like I was a student again. And I felt like I had a lot to learn, right? I had a lot to learn from my peers who were fiction writers, and from the novels that I was reading at the time and the stories. And I really felt, I really got a lot from that process.
Interesting. So just a last question for you, Sally. In Ninetails, you dedicate the book to the wanderers. And I wondered, who are they?
I think my generation and the newer generations don't necessarily follow a very, linear path in life, where it's like, oh, you get a job after graduation and then that's your job for the rest of your life.
Right,
That doesn't. I find that like more and more people, they are just figuring it out as they go, and that I think is such a common human experience, and the fox spirit is sort of a master of that, of just improvising and adapting to different places, different times, different histories, and that's why it has endured for so many thousands of years.
Really interesting. Sally, thank you so much for all this time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This is lovely.
Thank you. All right, now we are going to head to our podcast studio to see what Isabel Ortiz has for us in Breaking Books.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Breaking Books. I'm Isabel Ortiz, and today I am joined by author Alejandro Heredia to discuss his debut novel, Loca. Hi Alejandro, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
This book, what can I say? I am so excited to dive into this because it explores friendship, queerness, and migration through such a powerful lens. So I would love if you can talk about Loca, the story, and our two main characters, Sal and Charo.
Yes, so Loca is a novel about two best friends, Sal and Charo, who live in the Bronx in the year 1999. At the beginning of the novel, they find themselves both stuck in different ways, trying and, I like to say, miserably failing at building a new life for themselves as new immigrants.
And these characters, much like your own story, immigrated from the Dominican Republic to New York. So were there aspects of your own journey that you're pulling from, especially when it comes to Sal's character and his journey throughout the book?
I came to the U.S. when I was 7 years old, and Sal comes to this country when he's 19, 20 years old.
Yeah.
And I will say that is it's a vastly different experience having a childhood here in the U.S. versus having your entire adolescence be elsewhere. And in fact, that's part of what inspired me to write Sal's story. I was really curious about what it might have been like to have had a queer adolescence in the Dominican Republic, because I did not have that.
Mm-hmm. And you touched on this queer adolescence in the Dominican Republic. There is a lot of talk in the book about what masculinity looks like, especially when it's in the Dominican Republic and then in New York.
Part of what I'm pointing to is just in the novel through these characters is the very basic fact that gender is a performance, and it's something that we learn. It's not something that we're sort of necessarily always born with. It's something that we sort of pick up as we're growing up, that other people are affirming, other people are telling us not to cross our legs like this, or not to wear this, or not to talk like this. There are a lot of expectations that the characters are grappling with throughout the novel that is grounded in their relationship to their gender. Some characters feel, like Sal, feel maybe more attuned or comfortable with his masculinity as a queer person, versus other characters like Yadiel completely shun it and say, I'm not a man in this way that has been society has tried to make me be like.
And something I really appreciated was between Sal and Jado is when they first meet, they're not the best of friends.
Yes.
It takes a minute for them to warm up to each other. Yes. But it's also kind of an opportunity for Jado to learn from Sal and from this new community that she hadn't been exposed to or had heard stereotypes about. Mm-hmm. So what was that intentional that you took Jado's journey of like learning more about this community? Was that intentional?
I think sometimes when we're writing queer stories, we want to sort of almost sanitize them and make them perfect and create these characters that sometimes feel unrealistic, right? Like, this novel is taking place in the 90s at a time where people did not have all of the language that we have now to understand queer identity and the variety of queer identities. And so it felt to me like a responsible thing to do, to show Jado, or write Jado as almost like an imperfect ally, right? She is befriending Sal when they first meet, and she's really interested and curious about him, but she also has all of this homophobic and transphobic baggage that she has learned from just being a person in the world. For me, it was really important to show that complexity and to show that they can still become friends and become close, even though she's carrying that baggage and working through those things.
I think, too, you mentioned that both of these characters are kind of grappling or struggling with, I thought life was going to be this way. I thought when we got to New York, it was going to be this one way, and it's not. And for Jado, it's her being a mom and all the complexities that come with being a new mom.
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to explore in the novel is just the good and the bad of community, right? Jado and Sal are coming into the United States, coming to the Bronx, to a Dominican community that is pretty much fully formed, right? There are supermarkets and restaurants and hair salons. There's a world. There's what I call the Dominican village there that sort of is welcoming them. And that is of great benefit to a new immigrant like Jado. But the drawback to that is also that a lot of those cultural expectations that existed on the island are brought over to the sort of the new home space. Jado leaves her family behind in part because she wants to be unlike who she was on the island. She wants to be a new person. And she finds herself, yes, being enveloped by this community that made up of people just like her, which is great in some ways, but in other ways, she finds herself stunted by it. That scene that you're talking about, she's walking with her baby down 170 on Grand Concourse, and she runs into her parents' friends, who she knows these people are reporting pretty much her every move back home to her parents. Yeah. And so she feels there's a sense of belonging, but there's also a sense of claustrophobia that she feels with her community. And
I know that you wrote Loca during your time at Hunter College, and you sold it before you graduated. Mm-hmm. So what was that like? Was there anything from Hunter that kind of influenced your perspective on what it's like to be published, or that process?
Yes, 100%. I went to Hunter College's MFA program, and it was an incredible experience. One of the best things that I took from that program was, and this was thanks to the great professors there, especially Adam Hazlett, who runs the program. He's the director of the program. Adam always sort of told us or reminded us that the point of being a writer is to write and to pay attention to one's craft. That the publishing stuff and the public-facing component of being an author, that stuff would come eventually. But before all that comes, you have to focus on creating the best version of the story that you want to write.
Well, I am so happy for you and so glad, and I really enjoyed this book. But I have to know, why Loca?
Yes, so many reasons. So Loca in the Dominican context is a word that is used sometimes to refer to women who are not conforming to the societal expectations that are expected of them. So if a woman is not dressing a certain way, or if she's not getting married in time, or if she's acting sort of out of sync with what's expected around her, she's called a loca. A loca is also a word that is used to refer in a derogatory way to gay men and queer feminine people, again, when they are defying the gender, the expectations that are held for them in regards to gender. But it's also, it has these negative connotations, but it's also the way that I've heard so many queer people refer to one another in a loving way. And so I wanted to, part of the goal of the title is to show the ways in which queer people and Dominican people and Caribbean people and Black people across the diaspora take the language that is often used to reduce their lives and flip it on its head and use it to empower themselves and each other.
I love that it has multiple meanings. But are you working on anything now?
Yes, I am working on another novel. I realized that I am not a short story writer. I've written short stories. I try to write them every now and then. But I'm definitely a novelist. So I'm working on the second book now.
Okay, nice. Is there something particularly like why you don't like short stories?
I think I just need a lot of, at least right now, I feel like a very character-driven writer. And so I like to spend a lot of time with a cast of characters and the world that they inhabit. And so I just need the extra wiggle room. Doing that in the span of 12 to 15 pages is an amazing feat, but not a feat that I'm able to to overcome. So,
well, I know for myself, I love a good novel, so I am very excited to see what you come out with next, and especially to see how fleshed out I'm sure it will be, and to see what character pops into your head next.
Yes.
But thank you so much for being here. It was such a pleasure getting to speak with you today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
It's time for Uncensored, and as always, author and book critic Linda Stasi has plenty to say about what she's reading.
If you had won genetic lotto and turned it into fame, glory, and bazillions, as Christie Brinkley had, you would think, well, you had nothing to complain about, right? But Brinkley, whose memoir, Uptown Girl, which is ever upbeat and sunny, still has a whole lot of complaining going on, usually about the men in her life. She seems to be constantly in love, constantly cheated out of money, and cheated on by those same men, mostly husbands. Meantime, the woman marries as often as the rest of us get manicured. There's the French artist who she suddenly stopped loving, the French race car driving champagnaire who cheated on her and then crashed and died, Billy Joel who drank and cheated, the cowboy husband who nearly died with her in a helicopter crash, then cheated on her and cheated her out of millions, and the pretty boy ex-model husband who cheated on her with a teenager and used Brinkley like an ATM. Now seriously, what kind of chutzpah does it take to cheat on the world's most beautiful woman? But the book certainly has its moments, and they are riveting. This is true, even though the writing at times is about as sluggish as a textbook. More facts, less feeling. But what really drove me nuts is when she describes how Billy Joel grew up in a Levitt house in a tough blue-collar, mostly Italian neighborhood where everyone hustled and the girls all snapped gum, swore, and were uncouth. Huh? I was one of those girls. I went to the same high school, was the only Italian-American I even knew. None of us were loudmouthed, snapped gum, or were uncouth. Billy Joel took piano lessons with my best friend Roy, and the most criminal activity I ever saw was when someone didn't mow their lawn. Okay. One time Billy's boys mooned the father of the prettiest girl in town, but that was about it. I don't know what the point of the book is, but you know what? It's a good beach read, especially for those of us who aren't 6-foot-tall goddesses and always wondered what it would be like. Speaking of Famous Last Words by Gillian McAllister is a thriller about new mom/literary agent Camilla, who on the first day back at work gets smacked upside the head by a news flash on the office TV. Apparently, her lovely and loving husband has taken 3 hostages in a warehouse and is threatening to kill them all. The story is told from 2 different views, Camilla's and Niall's, the hostage negotiator who seemingly misread the situation and can't get past his tragic failure. With her killer husband on the lam and no answers to why a perfect guy would go rogue, Camilla tries to raise her child, do her job, and cope with the shame that has tarred her child. The great news? Hallelujah, amen. Finally, a book with an actual satisfying conclusion. For Uncensored, I'm Linda Stasi.
That wraps up another chapter for us. Thanks so much for being here. A quick reminder to download our app so you can watch on the go and check out our social media. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Carol Anne Riddell. See you next time on Book It.